Okay, so I will admit this video is going to be quite out of character for me, and we're going to be talking about the best differentials in FPL. Alright, kicking things off straight away, the first player I wanted to talk about is Dominic Solanke. Now, 10.1% ownership, I'd suggest, is on like borderline as to whether he is a differential or not. I'd say sort of 10% or under. I'm going to count this, only 10.1, right? Solanke, for me, he just ticks all the boxes of a good FPL asset. He starts every game that he's fit for, plays 90 minutes. I mean, he started 37 games last season, only missed one game in the entire of last season, right? So suggests to me that, you know, he's pretty rarely out injured, right? He takes penalties. He's the Bournemouth talisman. 19 goals last season for 7.5 million. I think it makes him really, really good value. Opening fixtures are not too bad. You know, Newcastle, certainly last season at least, they weren't the best defensively. So them at home is not a fixture I'd be too put off by. Then either side of that, he's got Nottingham Forest and Everton. I think that's a really decent set of opening fixtures. Obviously, all the talk at the moment is about Isak, Watkins, Haaland, João Pedro, etc. Not seeing too many people talking about Dominic Solanke, whereas, you know, in my mind, I think he's a really safe pair of hands to put into your team. You know, I absolutely love in FPL, and there's going to be a theme of this across some of the players I talk about, right? But I absolutely love players in FPL that are nailed to start, rarely get injured, play 90 minutes, so they're on the pitch for every minute that's available, and they take penalties, because it just means they have so many opportunities to score points. You know, it's not like a player that gets subbed after 60 minutes, doesn't necessarily take penalties, run hot and cold. Solanke, I wouldn't say he's completely fixture-proof, but I'd back him to score against pretty much anyone. And Bournemouth in particular, I just see good signs under their new manager, newish manager, Iraola. I think he's a really competent manager and has got them, you know, playing to a decent standard. I think Solanke's only going to kick on as well. One observation I've made about him in previous season is just the amount of improvement that he makes season on season. Like last year was, I wouldn't call it a breakout season, but 19 goals in seasons before that, etc. A lot of people doubting him. Obviously, you know, had a bit of time at Liverpool, didn't work out there, then moved to Bournemouth and really, obviously stepped it up, really worked on his game and improving. You know, he's not necessarily a young player anymore, but I do expect him to improve this season on what he did last season. You know, I would not be surprised at all to see him get over 20 goals a season, provided he can stay fit. So with all that in mind, you can see there as well, I've got the FF Hub expected points for him on there. If you want to sign up to Fantasy Football Hub, you can check the link below in the description. I get you 50% off. But yeah, Dominic Solanke, like I said, a really safe pair of hands. And at 10.1% ownership, I think a really nice differential. Okay, next up, Heung-min Son, another player that just ticks every box of a good FPL asset. I'm going to keep repeating myself, but I do think it just makes a player really, really good in FPL. He's nailed to start. Starts pretty much every game. Obviously, he picks up the odd injury here and there, but started 34 games last season, right? Rarely out injured. The Spurs talisman and penalty taker. As things stand, at least, I've seen that Tony is linked to Tottenham at the moment. You've got to think, you know, if Tony signs for Tottenham, he's probably going to start for them. And given how good he is at pens, he might take the penalties off Son. But right now, Heung-min Son is a designated penalty taker for Spurs. And when you look at the fixtures that he's got, Leicester away in game week 1, like, I genuinely say he could well be a captaincy option there, right? The 3 promoted teams all going up. There's not much to choose between them defensively, and I think they'll all be really quite poor in the league this season. That's obviously Ipswich, Leicester and Southampton, right? Leicester got relegated, in my mind, for having a poor defence a couple of seasons ago. They've not really improved. It's Woutvaas, Vestergaard, etc. in defence. They're not, in my mind, at Premier League level, and I think Tottenham can score a fair few goals there. Everton at home after that, you know, they did all right defensively last season in terms of keeping clean sheets, did Everton. But on the whole, their expected goals against, etc. was just bang average in the league, right? At the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, I expect them to do well there. Son could score. And then Newcastle away, I don't know, I just get a feeling that's going to be an absolute goal fest. You know, both teams not all that good defensively. I think they're going to be scoring on each other left, right and centre. So opening fixtures for Son are really good. And comparatively with like other players at this price point, I'm looking at Foden. Foden seems to be quite popular in a lot of FPL teams that I'm seeing, both on Twitter and YouTube. I just think when you compare Foden and Son with each other, Son comes out on top, right? He's more nailed, in my opinion. Obviously, with Man City being in the Champions League, pet roulette being a factor, etc. I know Foden played a lot of games last season, but with Pep, there's always a risk of rotation, whereas you've got to think Son is less likely to be rotated out of that Spurs starting 11 than Foden, right? And he takes penalties. That's something Foden doesn't do. One thing, just looking at those numbers that you might be put off by, Son scored 17 goals last season from only 11.5 XG. But if you look at his historic stats from the last, 3 or 4 years that he was at Tottenham, or however long he's been at Tottenham, he always outperforms his expected goals data because he's just such an elite and good finisher. So I wouldn't let that put you off, because it happens every season. He massively outperforms his XG every season. And, you know, him being a really elite finisher, wouldn't you want him in your team? And also, you know, I do think he's going to spend quite a lot of the season playing at number 9 for Spurs, and he's classed as a midfielder in this game. So he's basically out of position. 10 million for a player that ticks all the boxes in FPL. I think, you know, he's pretty much guarantees you 15 to 20 goals every season, and he got 10 assists on top of that last year, right? I'd expect him to score around 20, get another 10 assists, 30 attacking returns across the season, right? There's a pretty safe, I would say, projection for what Son can do. I think he's good value at 10 million, and at 9.1% ownership at the moment, I think he puts you ahead of the pack if he does well. All right, the next player I wanted to talk about is probably a little bit more of a punt in my mind than Son, but it's Morgan Gibbs-White of Nottingham Forest. Now, he's another one in my mind that ticks all the boxes. He's going to be now to start for Forest, likely playing 90 minutes every game. And I've said maybe on pens. I think it entirely depends on who starts at centre forward, but I think he is the designated penalty taker for Nottingham Forest. And when you look at the opening 3 fixtures of all the teams in the Premier League, I believe that Nottingham Forest have the best. And certainly at the 6.5 million price point, right, there are a lot of players you could pick here. And what I would say, like Nkunku, etc., is another 6.5 million midfielder I would consider. But Nkunku's got Man City at home up first, right? And, you know, Gibbs-White being only 6.6% owned, slightly better fixtures than Nkunku to kick off with. Why not pick a lower-owned player with much better fixtures to at least start the season? I'm not saying Gibbs-White is going to be a season-long hold. I don't think, you know, he's absolutely going to light the world up this season. But the opening fixtures for Forest are really kind. And not only do I think he could be the penalty taker, should be the penalty taker, he's going to be on free kicks as well. He just has multiple routes to point, similar to the 2 players I've just described in Son and Solanke, right? And last season, you know, he only scored 5 goals, but got 12 assists, 17 attacking returns from 35 starts, 1 attacking return every couple of games is not too bad. And I think another factor as well, he's had the summer off, didn't play for an international side over the summer, so he's had a full pre-season to really work on his game and improve himself, you know, settle into the Nuno Espirito Santo system, etc. I think the stars are aligning for Morgan Gibbs-White to have a pretty strong season. And with those 3 opening fixtures, I'd say it's pretty low risk to put him in your team. You know, after those 3 fixtures, if you don't like him or want to swap him to someone else, then fair enough. But I think, given how good they are, you should give him a chance for those first 3 games. I'm going to apologise in advance for being a little bit Nottingham Forest heavy, but with the good fixtures they have to start the season, I think you'd be a fool to at least ignore them as just an option, right? You don't necessarily have to pick them, but I think you have to be cognizant of those fixtures and, you know, appreciate them as options. Chris Wood had an absolute blinder last season, scored 14 goals from 20 starts. What I would say though, those numbers are great, and I think he probably starts off this season in the Forest starting lineup, right? He had such a good run of things towards the end of last season. I think he deserves his place in the 11 to begin with. But he's got Awoniyi as competition, and I don't think the 2 of them are going to play up front together. I think Nuno's going to play, you know, 1 single striker supported by the likes of obviously Gibbs-White, Elanga and Hudson-Odoi. I think that's how we'll line up. So I think he begins the season, but the risk that Wood has is Awoniyi. Awoniyi, his, I'd argue, almost as good, if not better, than Wood on his day. So Wood does carry with him a little bit of a minutes risk, but a £6 million striker, 3.6% ownership, 0.64 expected returns per 90. In fact, if you just go back to Heung-min Son, he outdid Son in terms of the amount of expected goals plus assists that he got per 90 minutes in the league last season. So that's the level that Chris Wood was performing at, and he's a whole 4 million cheaper than Son. So yeah, just something to bear in mind, I would say. 14 goals from 20 starts, right? Even caught me by surprise how good Wood's stats were last season. And similar to obviously Gibbs-White, he's got those great opening fixtures coming up. The Fantasy Football Hub projected points are really strong. If you got 5 points per game from Chris Wood at 6 million to start the season, I think you'd be pretty happy with yourself, right? And what I would also suggest, João Pedro is probably my favourite sort of 6 million and below striker, but his opening 3 fixtures are pretty tough. Whereas you can look at Chris Wood's here, I'd say they're well, I've already spoken about it with Gibbs White. I think they've probably got the best opening three of any team in the league. So you pick Chris Wood for those opening three. If he starts losing his place in the team, doesn't necessarily perform, I don't think João Pedro is going to light the world up with the difficult fixtures he's got to start with. So maybe pick Wood for the first three, then drop him to João Pedro, something like that. But you just can't ignore those first three fixtures. I keep saying it, but that's because I believe it. All right, the final Nottingham Forest player then, and it's Anthony Elanga. At 3.3% ownership, I think he makes for a nice differential. The one thing I have noticed is a lot of people are looking towards Callum Hudson-Odoi as the player that they pick for Nottingham Forest, and I can't deny that Hudson-Odoi is a good option. But when you look at the stats in a little bit more detail, right, I actually think Elanga could be better. Now, Hudson-Odoi scored 8 goals from 2.7 expected goals last season, right, which, whichever way you look at it, is a massive overperformance. Now, I would say, you've got the elite finishers, likes of Son, etc., that will historically always outperform their expected goals data. But Hudson-Odoi, I don't necessarily think ticks that box. And when you look at the expected data for Elanga, it is a lot better than Hudson-Odoi's was. So what I would say, I've seen a lot of people picking Hudson-Odoi. Looking at Elanga's stats are actually better. So at 3.3% ownership, he's less owned than Hudson-Odoi. Stats are arguably better. With Gibbs White and Wood, we spoke about the Forest fixtures. I don't need to speak about them again. They're fantastic, right? And that's the little comparison I would make between him and Hudson-Odoi. You've got the numbers there to make your own decision. But if you want to go different, I think Callum Hudson-Odoi is going to be pretty popular at the start of this season. But I'd argue that Elanga could well be better. Now, I mentioned this when talking about Heung-min Son, but Tony does look likely to be leaving Brentford this summer. Whether he goes to Tottenham or not, I think remains to be seen. That might come out in the next few days. But he was flirting with a move away from Brentford for absolutely ages, right? Last summer, he was caught saying bad things about Brentford on social media. He was caught saying he wants to move to a big club. It's pretty poor how he's been flirting with other teams, right? So I think he's going to leave, and that leaves a gaping hole to become their talisman. And I think Mbeumo will fill that hole. We saw that at the start of last season. Mbeumo was one of the best players in the game for the period of time before he got injured and when Tony was suspended. He took the penalties, he took the free kicks, he was nailed on to start for Brentford, played 90 minutes every game, and put up some really, really strong numbers. 9 goals and 7 assists from 22 starts is, I'd say, a very respectable level of returns. Fixtures to start with, not necessarily the easiest. Crystal Palace are going to be tough this season, I think. Then Liverpool at Anfield, but then he's got Southampton at home. And one thing I guess to bear in mind with Brentford is historically, they seem to match up quite well against the big and good teams. So Crystal Palace and Liverpool, I would not be surprised for a second if Brentford could score some goals against those teams. And obviously if they do, being their talisman on pens and free kicks, etc., I'd imagine that Mbeumo will be involved. And that, my favourite stat to analyse players in this game at the moment is expected returns per 90, right? That is a combination of their expected goals and assists, so returns, per 90 minutes, right? And Mbeumo at 0.71 outscores any other midfielder at that price or below. There's no better midfielder for expected returns per 90, 7 million or below than Mbeumo in the numbers he put up last season. So, yeah. What I would say is it does depend on what happens with Tony. I still think he's pickable if Tony stays at Brentford, but having penalties for me kind of tips the scale for Mbeumo. So keep your eye on Tony, whether he leaves or not. And if he does, Mbeumo is going to be a cracking option. Now, we'll move off the forwards and midfielders for a second and talk about some defenders. Now, Diogo Dalot at 5 million, I think could prove to be a decent option this season. He was clearly one of Man United's best players last season. Did he win the Player of the Year award? Not too sure, but he was definitely in contention to win the Player of the Year award, right? And with Aaron Wan-Bissaka looking likely to move away, he's already been linked with a move to West Ham. I don't think anything's been officially announced or close to actually leaving yet, but they're certainly, in my mind, looking to sell Wan-Bissaka. And Dalot absolutely nailed down the spot in the team ahead of Wan-Bissaka, and he can also play right or left back, so his versatility, I think, really helps him, and basically just helps him get more starts in the Premier League for Man United. And I also think with the signing of Lenny Yoro, Martinez coming back from injury, and potentially signing a centre defensive midfielder as well, I think Man United are going to really improve defensively. And I think Dalot's just going to be a set and forget player, to be honest. With the way that Ten Hag sets up, you just can't exactly predict how Man United are going to play, right? But what I'm trying to say is they could potentially keep clean sheets against the big teams in a cagey sort of 0-0 draw, something like that, right? I just think Man United are going to improve next season. And defensively and attacking wise, they're going to improve. And Dalot at 5 million, yes, there are other defenders, Martinez, Yoro, etc. you could pick at 4.5, but I think Dalot carries with him a lot more goal threat than he actually proved he had last season, right? 5 attacking returns from 35 starts is a little bit disappointing. I think he could do better than that this season, particularly if he's playing at right back, where he can obviously cross the ball with his right foot. I think he's going to be a really good option this season. For me, I don't think I'm necessarily going to start with him in my team. I think we need to see 2 or 3 good performances from Man United at the start to really prove that they're worth going for. But if you want to get ahead of the competition, 3.6% ownership for a team that I think are going to improve a lot this season, or defence at least it's going to improve a lot, I think Diogo Dalot could be a really nice option for you. Now, I've spoken about 4.5 million defenders quite a lot in my videos, but one player I've not actually spoken about that much is Anthony Robinson. Now, you ignore the Man United away fixture because ultimately at 4.5 million, you could bench him if you really wanted to, but remembering what happened at Man United away for Fulham last season, right? They beat them and Robertson had a really good game. 5.2% ownership, and then in game week 2, he's got Leicester at home and then Ipswich away. Decent fixtures, I would suggest. And Robinson, I think, this might be, might be a bit controversial, but I genuinely think he's one of the best left backs in the league. He is a really talented and capable left back with some great athleticism as well. I really do think that both in attack and defense, he's really, really good. Now, there's very little in my mind to split a lot of the 4.5 million defenders in the game at the moment. There are so many options. I've spoken about them in my best defenders video. You can check that out on my channel. I didn't mention Robinson because at the time I didn't consider him an option, but actually I think he is, particularly with that Leicester and Ipswich double up in game week 2 and 3. Now, some really nice fixtures there. And Fulham, I didn't realise this, but they actually kept 10 clean sheets last season. 9 of them when Robinson got 9 of the 10 basically. That's not a bad return. So what's that? 6 and 9. So that's 15 from 37. So not too bad set of returns. 15 returns from 37 starts for a 4.5 million defender. The one thing I'd say, and I guess it's the case with all of these differentials, right? They don't come without a little bit of a risk and a few question marks. And the question mark I would say about Fulham at the moment, losing João Palhinha to Bayern Munich, just how big of a loss is that going to be? I genuinely think he's one of the best centre defensive midfielders in the world and goes quite underrated. I do not know how another club other than Fulham weren't in the market for him when they did manage to sign him. But I think he's going to be a big loss to Fulham. Exactly how many goals and clean sheets they will lose as a result of losing him, we're not entirely sure yet. I don't think we've seen enough of Fulham without him. But that's just one thing to bear in mind. All of these differentials pretty much come with a little bit of risk, and Anthony Robertson is no exception. But those opening, game weeks 2 and 3 fixtures at least, I still think he could be a really nice differential. All right, that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a like rating. I might make another one of these because there are just so many differentials in the game that I could talk about. This is a selection, but I could make another video about some more. So if you want me to do another differentials video, then let me know in the comments down below. One thing, I spoke about the Fantasy Football Hub expected points. Just a reminder, if you want to see that expected points data for yourself, it comes in the form of an AI team creator. There's so many, in fact, yeah, just to name a few, there are so many fantastic, helpful features on Fantasy Football Hub. You can sign up in the description. I've got a 50% off code for you, so you save 50% on your sign up. Be grateful you can support the channel by clicking that and signing up to Fantasy Football Hub, and also support yourself because it's really going to help improve your FPL game. If you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more content from me, I'll have plenty more FPL content coming your way before the start of the season. You can subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be just there on your screen. And finally, thank you very much for watching. I will catch you in my next video.